Sanje Chodan Soji Chona La Chanju Badu Dani Dagu Chijin Jive Sanam Je Dangla Benje Sanje Ru Jo Sanje Chodan Soji Chona La Chanju Badu Dani Dagu Chijin Jive Sanam Je Dangla Benje Andrew Basho, Sanje Chodan Soji Chona La Chanju Badu Dani Soji Dagi Sonanje Drola Benje Sanje Druwa Sho La Da La Me Midame Aji Yajin La Su Choji Chola Chowa Chabana Sanje Sumbara Doji Shintewe Chiru Chowa Chita Chichi Tepe Chinye Jinne Desi Tewe Jajin Yende Rinji Sawe Deji Ba Chinji Cheba De La Chudu Techin Guba Yindi Lebe Nyenje Shinsa Chunsa Yime Ambi Dani Lewa Tu La Tuwe Sunye Je Nama La Ye Kata Lu Dani Chinka Chubunda Nama Ye Zhuo Gunji Zhano Chi Zamba Tamje Ke Dunda Gui Chi De Do Oya Da Tian Pawa Yugo Chung Xiwa Les Ta Rangje Nala Dua Ro Papa Yugo Chung Xiwa Les Tomba Xiwa Jewa Mebi Su Mishiba Nian Zhuwa Chamjuba An Teda Tujen Ngaiwe Tabzu Jan Riba Jata Kini Zuba Ze Zeni O Da Suwa Na Xie Cheni O Da Digi Kasungu Re Sena Tomba Xiwa Jewa Mebi Su Se De Da Che Tamjeji Kansa Chidana Go Tamje Getindu An Tomba Ni Den La Bedu Zamba An Namba Tabi Gosum Cheni Sungu Re in the number type of course, Tomba, and more Demba Tomba. I need good number to be Sama Shiva, Joe Demba Giva Meba, Jenny, and Thomas de Sungari. That she chilla march at the Gana, Chitana over Khan Yinayang, Ran Jiji, and in Juti Rani Jang, or Rawangi Majiwa, the good number to be Sama Shiva. Chinangu over now. 아니 가서래 라왕게 있잖아 아니 귀chen 셴라 라말해봐 아니 셴라 믿어봐 인자 라왕게 있잖아 시 귀chen 셴라 라말려고 인자 귀chen 셴라 라 류바 인자 아니 라왕게 맞게봐 내 귀템바 주위 참마시와 아니 치다난 거 오랑 오 탐제 라랑 거 라왕도 맞추바디 오 템베 동와 Roa or Tibetoma. Chinango Tedaki, Rangi Tebu Jang, and then Debu or Rawandu Miki body, and then Debu Tembiki Meba, Sigana, or Tendeshana, and the numbers of a person body, Shichik into Masha Shokori. When the tender Anita, number of a person body, Mashipala, Mishipani, Ani or number type of question with the Masheba, Chinamji, Nelutombani, Masheba Inzang. Ani Kasore, Mishipani, Draw Chamjuba, Segana, Ani Tombani, Loso, Chinangungo, and Dambazi Denzin. Or Denzin Tigi, Gunalandi, Ani or Chata Masuji, Chata Masuji, Wangi, less, and then draw now, Ani or that, then you go Wangi, Juna, called Chambachua Inzang. 미시반에 들어와 참 주봐. 야. 야. 앉아서
통바시와
통바시와 개와 매비.
So there's a verse in the Upali Paripurcha, the questions of Upali, and in that verse it says not understanding that things are empty, that things are empty, that they're peaceful and unarisen. By not understanding the way in which things are empty, peaceful and unarisen, the world wanders in samsara. And what this indicates then in this verse contains within it reference to the three doors of liberation. The the
동바스나
yeah.
치당한 거 오고 나와 라왕기 랑기 오 마주바데 안에 동바체.
So as far as the first of these, the emptiness aspect of it refers to that by their own nature, things are empty of any kind of intrinsic existence.
오야 시와세데 안에 규된바 주에 참아 시와세가나 다 지난 공호 코랑기 띵도 동바를 자기이나 안에 치다난 그 오나와 아니 랑기 규젠라 제장 아니 규젠 티기 라왕기 마제바데 라왕기 야제나 안에 셴라라 말레바 용고와 인자 안에 셴라라 레바 인자 라왕기 마제바데 아니 규된바 주에 참아시와.
So then the second of these, that they're peaceful, that is in reference to the causes that give rise to them. And here it's first, the first one is pointing at the actual character of phenomena themselves, that they're devoid of intrinsic existence by their very character. And then the second point, that they're peaceful, refers to the fact that the causes that give rise to them, or that things in terms of arising from causes, are not produced by causes that are established as real. They're not arising, coming out of causes that are existing by means of their own intrinsic nature as well. So that's the second of the three doors of liberation.
Oh yeah. 세 대우 덴베께와 매바세데 친단한 그 오테다기 아니 랑기 대부 제장 대부 라왕기 미제바 어 대부 라왕기니 아니 제기나 아니 규제 초마조서 현라 마라 말레바 인고와 일라 아니 라라 테 현라 라레와 인상 아니 라왕기 미제바.
Then as far as the things functioning as conditions or causes for subsequent phenomena arising, then likewise the things don't arise such that they produce real effects that exist in some kind of autonomous fashion, existing without depending upon other things.
Oh yeah, 텐다위 남바탑이 한고 동바니 숨보테 남바탑이 고 숨보테 라 남바탑이 고 세제 텐다위 동바니 무슨도 또나 아노 코알라 타르지 텔라 마용숨도 마다노 코알라 메타바 인자 남바탑이 고 쓰고 하이베.
So they're called the doors of liberation because if one understands them, then those three aspects of phenomena, that by their nature they're empty, in terms of the causes that give rise to them, they don't have real causes and they don't arise from some kind of real intrinsically existing causes. And then likewise, they don't have the capacity to give rise to effects, such that they would be the effects or the things giving the things themselves that produce effects would have some kind of autonomy that doesn't exist in dependence upon other things. Then three sort of aspects of phenomena, that all inner and outer phenomena possess all of these characteristics. So we're talking primarily about functional things here that arise from causes and produce effects. So once one understands that these things are devoid of those kinds of characteristics that are the opposite, the contraries of what has just been described, then one can achieve liberation. But until one does understand that properly, there's no way to achieve liberation. So that's why these three are called the doors to liberation.
Oh yeah, 텐자위 되니다 남바타비 고통바니 남다타비 고선보데 마시바 인장 아니 내루 동바니 마도 내루 동바니 마도와 인장 아니 내 동바니고 아니 로조 라완도 추바지니 치당난 거 오와나 라완도 추바지 좀바 데 아니 가서 라완도 집에 댄지 오 텔라 때네 아니 오 차단 모수지 차단 모수지 왕게 아니 소나도 소나 많이 빌레스아니 아니 레디 아니 가서 바자거데 아니 바자 민발할 때는 아니 랭이지만 그 코를 참니 아니 동안 나서 받지 연구와 연구와 인상 미셰반이 좋아 참 줄봐.
So the next line from the sutra says, from not understanding that things are, that have that characteristic of being empty of intrinsic existence, then beings wander. It says, the text says wander, meaning here this is referring to because of not understanding these properties of phenomena, that they're by nature devoid of intrinsic existence, that in terms of their arising from causes, they're devoid of intrinsic existence. In terms of the way they produce effects, they're likewise devoid of intrinsic existence. Instead, beings misapprehend things such that they imagine that things possess a kind of autonomy, that they're existing autonomously. And out of that error, which is a misapprehension of the actual way things exist, then from that basic form of ignorance, then beings engage in actions, and actions that are contaminated by that kind of misapprehension, then they stain one's stream of consciousness or stream of awareness, and those stains then function as the causes for the arising of, first by misapprehending the nature of the way things actually exist, then beings give rise to attachment, animosity, anger, and also further forms of confusion. And then based upon that, those other additional aspects of the mental afflictions, then they engage in contaminated activities that stain their consciousness, and then those stains function as the principal causes subsequently to give rise to forms of suffering in the future. And so in that way, then they wander.
Oh yeah. 동아지 나위 아니 섬전 대다라 아니 동아지 나수 삼백이 아니 사와 인지 준비 샤원도 주디 그러와 아니 대다 동아 유단 제와라 아니 차월 제바기 아니 투정아와기 아니 녀메샤제 돈배 아니 섬전 대다 코알란 드라위 시도 아니 홍에서 담에 때문에도 중앙 대다라 아니 담에 바당 무슨 땜바당 다음에 배당 무슨 때마 메루마라 아니 다음에 무슨 다음에 봐라 야 티비시도 아니 탑지수 아니 민라와 리바자다게 거네 아니 다 주바자바레스
So then, thus, beings such as our Lord Buddha, out of their observation of the way that beings are tormented by all of the different kinds of suffering that arise from that whole process of causality, then such beings give rise to great compassion and love for beings, and then out of that love and compassion, they engage in various forms of skillful means to induce sentient beings to understand reality through, and so the method that they employ is by teaching them the nature of selflessness, absence of self. And so that's sort of the direct antidote, but there has to be there are also multiple adjuncts, auxiliary teachings that are necessary to induce sentient beings to understand selflessness.
지시산제 두자라 치점수비 최된도 전에 아니 다들 로비간라 림바신도 로바텐나신 전에 랍고와나신 전에 아니 좀 된데 담보 아니 다음에 뜨면 내도 무릎이 두자라 아니 다음에 봤다 다도 추왔다 뒤나네 아니 다도 다음에라 차라 망보 예배가나 아니 참못 때문에 내도 메롱 아니 라바 때문에 내도 중에 되라 아니 도심이라 다지라 완전히 동화당 아니 치된데 시루튼도 주와 대인장 아니 카지라니 이덴바 카지라니 이덴바 라 카지라니 이덴바 세리 아니 주다 시나네 아니 도제와라 치된라 잠데 치된 마주나 차달라 lungu 와다 시루튼도 주와라 된데 다지라 완전히 동화 대
So then this is just like, as it's explained in the Precious Garland, where Master Nagarjuna has said that the Buddha teaches just like a person who is instructing basic grammar. Someone who's instructing a child or a student in the basics of language, they start off by teaching them the alphabet, and then based upon the alphabet, then they gradually develop further understanding of how language works. So just in that same way, then the Lord Buddha taught in different ways, he taught methods that lead one to the final or ultimate understanding of selflessness. So, for example, within the four schools of Buddhist philosophy, there's the views, the positions that are held in common by the Sautrantika and Yogacara schools. And within that, the Sautrantikas would say that there has to be, when the Buddha taught that view, then he taught it to them such that by presupposing the existence of external objects, so for that school, then the people that are following that kind of view, unless they believe that there are real external objects, then they're going to fall into a nihilistic kind of view and won't be able to make any progress, develop themselves in their understanding of selflessness. And then within the Yogacara view specifically, there's the position that the perceiving subject and the percept are not substantially different, that they're actually of the same substance. And so he taught that kind of view for people that would be positively influenced by understanding the absence of external absence of external objects that are substantially different from the mind that's perceiving them.
Oh yeah. That is 아니 가서래 치던 가 아니 치지다며 라바때나 뱅게 아니 누자 semsan 보다고라 아니 가지라니 이 미대 세가나 아니 순진 재현도 여기 치료튼도 주와 순진 재현도 주와데 때네 아니 뒤제라 semsan 봐라 아니 순진 재현기 동화 땜바인 바인장 가지라니 이 미대 가지라니 이 땜바 디임바래.
So in that verse, then it says, for some, the Buddha teaches the duality of subject and object, such that there are real external objects which are substantially different from the perceiving subject. And then for some, the verse says the Buddha taught non-duality. Here this is in reference to the non-duality view that's held by the Yogacara school, in which the perceiving subject and the percept, whatever the objects that it's perceiving, are not substantially different. They're not different substances that are being perceived as is presupposed within the Sautrantika school and the other schools below that, the other school below that.
Oh yeah, they can't just go to that dinner. What dinner the Jew Mambo share to the thing, she launched it to some to say Shirakasa, dinner Mambo soon to the that door dinner. 가서래 수당 순진 참만 재현지 동화 세팅 바래 와 대가는 나를 마마나 난 준비 비징을 되라 유나서 당자 파자지 천된비 세지 여바 마 전에 아니 군나창 소나 전에 와 수당 순진 참만 재태대도 주바디 파가네 수다 순진 참만 재태대도 주바 가데 아니 난 준비 비징을 되라 세일가나 아니 수준비 순진 참막 순진 참마데 아니 가서래 천지에 비례당 와정 비례당 배차를 순진 참마는 비텔라 아니 천 회와나 신체에 난 준비 비진 뭐에들라 유나서 당자 파자지 천대비 세지 여바마 세일가나 아니 다 그래서래 파자지 세지 세일가나 치당 난기 오 탐제 아니 귀시 땡게 파자 민발라 순당 순진 참만 니가 아니 파자지 민발라 깨바 인장 순진 어디래 나 준비 비중을 제 가나 준비기 제가 차셔지 하고서
준비
차셔지 난 준비 비중 윤나서 다자 당下윤나서 밖에 남밖에 당차위 아니 가서래 파자 덴바기 덴바 주와게 파자지 요되고
So there's a lot of discussion of this within the transcript commentary here, discussion of the different schools and how they present their views of reality. However, we're not going to go through all of the details of that. We don't have the time, and it's not appropriate perhaps to go through all of the details of the way it's presented in the sub-commentary here. So just to make it perhaps easier to understand, here with respect to the Yogacara position or mind-only school, we'll call it that, mind-only school, Chittamatra view, they have the view that the perceiving subject and the percept, the objects that the perceiving subject is apprehending, are of the same substance. And a sort of way to illustrate this is if you kind of imagine the mind is sort of has like two faces to it. One side is the perceiver as such that is perceiving the objects, but another part of the mind is sort of appearing almost like a blank wall or something that upon which some kind of design is being drawn. And also, so that is although it's here, it's not an external object. It's more like a dimension, a portion of the mind which is appearing as if it was an actual external object. So here, then, from according to the Yogacara view, there's a single sort of seed within the basal consciousness, the foundational consciousness. And a single seed within the basal consciousness, when it's activated and manifests, it appears in two forms. One is the perceiver as such, and the other is the percept, the thing which is being perceived or cognized. And in the case of the thing which is being perceived or cognized, then it's like a design that's mentally fabricated as a portion of the mind. So it's not a different substance from the perceiving aspect of the mind. Rather, it's of the same basic substance because it's arising from the same seed within the flow or stream of the basal consciousness. And so therefore, in their view, there are real things that are appearing to us. They exist. They're establishable as existing in the way they appear once one understands them properly. But for ordinary people, then they misapprehend the way these percepts or objects of cognition are arising, and they think that they're actual external objects that are substantially different from the mind that's perceiving them. So that's the mind-only school or the Yogacara school's view that that a cognition, here we're talking about cognitions which are accurate. They're not compromised by some kind of error or something like that. But they're, the subject and the object are devoid of being different substances. So that's their view of emptiness, is that the object and subject being devoid, not being different substances, is the kind of emptiness that they're advocating.
Oh yeah, didn't it? I know more Ranju Betawa, Taiwa, Ranju Betawa. That Ranju Bayan, I know Caso, Ranju Banan, they being you can call them Mammy Jang, say Gala. I need them to you over the you can Kaina, I need them Matruba. Ready, I know Caso and Rangon true and the degree of Zang. And Chado Tebe, Denjula, Mejuma, Denju Ransan say, Jadan Docha, Teddy Gala, Mejuma, Jadan, Niga Teddy, Niga Latina, and Mechungo Mato, Chachibuga, Memejum, 아니 도치부야 매매중화 이제 어 짜도의 제배 땡데라 매중화 땡주랑 세세세가나 아니 가서래 유중원의 주세축 유전중원의 봐 등자축 아니 주바 예장论内面了那有往个下巴马眼吧 아니 어디 때문에 나 요한 거 샤바 마연 봐 아니 랑은 투바 세야지 다도 샤고 아래
자토기
자 도당 차발라
자
자라 매 봐야 좋아라 도당 자도 매 봐야지 그래서 그랬다
So now then, with respect to the Swatantrika Madhyamika view, their view is they don't accept the way the Yogacara presents this. They have a different position. They would say that things exist, not such that they're established as real in the sense that they exist in the way that they appear to ordinary persons. So they don't accept that. Yet they would say that things do exist such that they're established by means of their own intrinsic identity, and they have a kind of existence which is in which things are established from their own side to some degree. Now, the way we can understand this with respect to cognition, they would say that in the case of when we have a cognition of an object, then the object and the perceiving subject are they're not existing as they appear to ordinary people, in that ordinary people superimpose a degree of autonomy upon the object and the subject, which is not warranted. Rather, what the Swatantrika Madhyamika would say is that the subject and object cooperate together to produce the cognition. Nevertheless, one has to say that the object has some degree of existence, intrinsic existence, some degree of being established by its own side, such that when one seeks a basis for the appearance of that object within one's cognition, there has to be something that's findable within the appearing object. So their view is that things don't exist such that they have a kind of autonomous mode of existence or autonomous existential status, which is independent of of their appearing to a cognition which is not compromised by some form of error. So they would say that in the case of a valid cognition, the appearing object and the cognition which is cognizing it are both, they have a degree of intrinsic existence. Otherwise, they wouldn't be determinable in any meaningful sense. So that being the case, you could use an example for this is like, for a cognition to occur, there has to be both, in the case of like when you're igniting a fire using a fire steel, there has to be both the fire steel as such, as well as the stone that one strikes it on in order to have that spark arise. And that's an example for their model of how cognition occurs with two things, the perceiving subject and the perceived object having some degree of intrinsic existence or intrinsic identity. But they nevertheless would say that it's not real in the way that it appears to ordinary persons.
Oh yeah, tentra inzanda shi chinan go ngobam ane khasa jig dawi khasa ge dingdu ane denzing ge chuyi nangja jebe denzing ge jebe ane chuyi nangja chara mabo yoche ro o chara di mabo yowa inza rarim ne ane daji shuwa na shi de chumda wome chinan ngobo daji rawan je ji dongwa da ane chiro tendu chuwa da 아니 란지베 셰베 딘진 템바 추바자라 소와 림바 신두마 어랑아랑 그 추다데달라 아니 가서라 장 지카도 그 따와데달라 잖마 추다 오마레 따와데달라 로전체베 아니 랑랑기 시지기 딘도 아니 추추이 나자데서 말레 세네 아니 추이 나자 라바도 추다 오마 세와체 다 참모대 안에 탄주에 다와 탄주와라 때네 안에 탄주에 슈라 때네 서고와 인상 안에 좀된 대지 취주 친이지 숨바 탐제 탈 안에 탄주에 다와 안에 라 치비 탑수 로아 많은 바와 인상 어저가 취주친이 숨바 탐제 안에 사모 탄주에 슈네 샤바게 사모 동반이 안에 달라도 또베 탑수 숨바 인상 여기 다시 여기 일바자다 그니 주바 제 세와당 야라디다 탐자니 투베 셰라 튼투 숭 세데 아니 진조키 야라디다 탐자니 룬도지 취수 신이 취송바 탐제 타를 사모동반이 아니 또 동반이 운수 또밤 텔라 티비치도 숭바치레스
So here then, thus, when we look at it, there are multiple levels at which the different schools of philosophy are rejecting things being real. Here, again, things being real means existing as they appear. So at the basic level, there's the rejection of a self, which is unitary, autonomous, and stable or enduring. So that's a basic level of a misconception, which can be eliminated through the basic level, basic analysis of the nature of the self. And that's done at the level of the Vaibhashika and for Sautrantikas and so forth. They also can eliminate that level of things being real or existing the way they appear. Then when one gets into the Yogacara view, they eliminate are able to eliminate the notion of a real duality of subject and object as it appears to ordinary persons. And then within the Swatantrika Madhyamika school, there's the elimination of the notion that that things exist as they appear to ordinary persons. In the kind of autonomous fashion that they appear to ordinary persons. But all of these lead eventually and flow into and are methods for developing an understanding of the ultimate view of Lord Buddha, which is the view as it is presented within the Prasangika Madhyamika school. That this is just as Lord Shantideva has said, where all of the different components of the other adjuncts or portions of the path are designed to lead one into wisdom. And the wisdom that he's referencing there is the wisdom of the view, which is understood as it's presented within the Prasangika Madhyamika system. So all of that to fully understand this, then it's valuable, it's necessary to properly study and train oneself in understanding the lower systems of Buddhist philosophy. You have to master them in order to be able to supersede them and go beyond them and eventually arrive at the final view, the ultimate view of the Prasangika school. And so they're necessary in their own right as stepping stones so as to arrive at this final view.
Oh yeah, that didn't I say random there song they all choboji jang 최지분부 제지다 시동순바 탐제장 신이 늘라 쇼싱파 좀된 되지 아니 최지분부 제지 시동순바 탐제 도제는 태권하니 아니 떠봐 무슨 떠봐 아니 균에 떠비 아니 탑라 탑수순바 라 아니 쇼싱파와리 지 이제 최봉 제지 시동순바 탐제장 타를 도제 천이 탐 다음에 무슨도 또봐 탈 신비 탑수 파월 숨바 인.
So this is just as it's explained in the self-commentary to the root text here, where it says that, and a quotation from Joje, and it says that Joje said that all of the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha, they're collected into 84,000 categories. All of these are designed and either directly to explain the nature reality, or their adjuncts, their factors which are used to direct different disciples in that direction, and that finally, when one reaches finally, they all of the 84,000 dharmas which were taught by the Buddha they flow into and they're absorbed into this final explanation, final reality or nature of things.
Oh yeah, ane samu tongpa ni tiala pa ma tu na ma ba la, ane sila song je ki na jo ki, ane jiang me me je ki ni mo ngon ju wa de shi pang wa de shi yin na yang, ane de ki ta ba tuo me nu ba de, da di song ka san ye ge xin ye ga su ta ba na xin ye chen ni, ga su de da me te sang ji tiala po kwen xin ye se, guo ba yang xin ye zam ji, ane mo de jiang ga shi da re se, sa ni mo没把他就给，俺呢我的等于是讲呢，俺呢这样慢慢就给你们把它，俺呢推着被告诉的，人别怕的等于是来让把下巴原那样，俺呢大多在都是证明当成报名的把的，大体送过来把的。
So this is then just as it's explained here in the auto commentary as well. I'm sorry, the sub commentary, where he mentions that here then this is very pertinent to the topic that we're discussing here, which is the way in which one coordinates shamatha and insight. Here, one can develop shamatha and develop an extremely powerful form of shamatha. But unless that is conjoined with and coordinated with insight, the insight which understands the nature of reality and selflessness, emptiness in particular, then that development of shamatha can be such that it will simply establish you, sort of embed you in samsara even longer, similar to the non-Buddhist meditator Uddaka, who he developed an extremely powerful form of shamatha, and such that he was able to remain in that absorption for eons of time, but that didn't serve as a means of achieving liberation from samsara. All he had done was to temporarily suppress the manifest forms of the mental afflictions, but without the insight which understands the nature of reality of selflessness, then there's no way to eradicate the mental afflictions from the root.
Oh yeah, 대답이 안에 실라 송제 잠기 안에 코알라 탈베 타바토 먹거나 안에 코알라 탈베 타바토 발에 띵이지 가르치고 그래 해야 되나 안에 가대 칠라 다음에 소소도 소소 대다 강시 권제 봐 되니 양년 대도 제부 주 교생 관계 되니 신민주로 송하되 오다 대인 말 저와 되게 다음은 타바토지 주조에 가르래 해서나 아니 가사다 취라 다음에 가사다 취 다음에 참을 때라 밤니 아니 다음에라면 신내당 아니 신내진 안에 요 다음에라 소소되게 셔러지 집에 상동 권이 상동 권발라 때네 아니 신내 아니 다음에 반이지 퇴 무슨도 또 되네 송아대 아니 당생기 뭐지 년보치에 고점네 림바신도 다진 참모 림바신도 봐 땅네 타를 안에 어때 딘진탐제 예와를 시바게 년보다 년만 예와를 시바게 타바제 토고와 인자 되니 양한데도 제부 요 시오다 다 어디 다음에 되니 무슨도 또비 안에 셰럽당 어때 탑지 나뭐 군단 대바 세가나 안에 탑지 심바기 어디기 탑지 심에 돈용 무슨 도베 셰럽 텔레 셴바기 타바다 탑지 셴바기 안에 탑지 그 주시한칸 요 말이
This thus means that there's no other method to achieve liberation or omniscience apart from the insight which properly understands the nature of reality. So here, what this indicates is that, first of all, one has to, by using extensive reasoning, employing the full extent of one's rationality to be able to investigate, analyze, and actually determine precisely the nature of selflessness. One has to use all of the very available means of reasoning so as to establish what the meaning of selflessness is, absence of a real self. Then once one has done that using rationality and reasoning, then once one has precisely determined the meaning of the two forms of absence of self, the non-self, absence of a real self of persons, absence of a real self of phenomena, then one takes that object that one has ascertained in that way as one's object of meditation. And then with the shamatha as a foundation, then one utilizes insight based upon shamatha, and that insight is itself an investigation and investigation of the nature of the object that one is focusing that shamatha upon, focusing that insight upon. And so then one initially develops a kind of understanding of the meaning of selflessness of persons and phenomena through an investigation. Finally, gradually over time, one develops a direct perception of selflessness of persons and phenomena, and then that direct perception or perception of selflessness or emptiness serves as the direct antidote to the misapprehension of self, of persons and phenomena. And so that then serves as the antidote for those. And initially, one is able to eliminate the grosser forms of misapprehension of self, and then gradually, over time, one eliminates even the subtler forms of misapprehension of the self. And then that, once one does that, one achieves liberation. Then with that wisdom conjoined with the best of all forms of method, then in conjunction with the method side of the path, then one gradually progresses through the stages of the bodhisattva and achieves Buddhahood in that way.
Oh yeah, that 대답이 남의 바태다 아니 다 가서를 동시권에 얘는 아니 다 가사가 담에 바다 취지 담에 봐서야지 가제달라 차라 매냥 아니 동시권에 아니 가사가 담에 바다 취지 담에 이 담에 되는 좋아 남조치 최다 가사 예 남이 송세 아니 좋아 남 아니 님바 응하다 제와라 좋아라 채와기 아니 나탑 담에 무슨 때문에 이시되기 강 아니 유가리 담에데 거래에서는 다 담에데 좋아 남조치 최다 가사에 와서 풍벌라 쏘와 아니 최다 네네 다시 풍벌할 때는 하다고 가등하대 뭐 가사대 가사제 가사기 땡기 아니 라시지 마주바대 가사 담에 풍속이 된도대 라시지 마주바대 최시 담에 그봐
So then, as far as selflessness, absence of a real self is concerned, it in its basic character is just the same. There's no significant difference as far as absence of a real self as such, but it's differentiated, it's divided into two types based upon the basis, which is empty of that kind of real self that is falsely projected onto it. So when we have phenomena such as the aggregates, and we establish the absence of a real self within such phenomena of the aggregates, then we call that the selflessness of phenomena. And then when we have the absence of a real self with respect to a person, then it's called the selflessness of the person. But the emptiness or the absence of a real self, there's no difference between selflessness of person, selflessness of phenomena as far as the emptiness or selflessness is concerned. Rather, it's simply being distinguished in terms of the basis of that emptiness, whether it's persons or phenomena. So here then, once one gains an understanding of selflessness, and if one is investigating the phenomena of that are found within the aggregates, and one finds that there's no real self or no real essence, that the phenomena of the aggregates are not established by means of their own intrinsic nature, then one's ascertained the selflessness of phenomena. When one shifts to look at the person or the I or the self as such, and then one determines that the person, the I, or the self, these are synonyms, are empty of being established by means of their own intrinsic nature, then one has determined the selflessness of the person.
Oh yeah, 대다 담에 이지 나네. 안행해라 가사 그 다음에 고목고야 돼. 띵어제 제위도 요 가서 지다주지 다게 두시니 시와 지시 꾸나 뇌자자. 네 가서 천나 탐제 대인 오원이 요소 타봐. 나가신도 동 해서 나신야 전에 다 채시 내지 가사 그때도 때라 봐나 또 나와다. 왜인상 내가 가사 그때도 가서 때라 밥 되네. 아니 풍부라서와 최신이도 때나 봐 두시 말이. 풍부라서와 최신이도 때나 봐.
So then the way lamya like
지다주지 다게 두시니 시와 티슈 꾸나 뇌자차 다게 두시스 다 랑신지 마주바데. 랑신지 투아간에 다 랑신지 메주바 때나 팜네. 랑신지 메바 아니 때나 파파 랑신 안다 대 최신의 바자르스.
So here then we can establish the selflessness of the person by examining the person or the I, and determining whether it's finding that it's absent of intrinsic existence. And then once one has ascertained the selflessness of the person, then one can apply that same understanding to other phenomena, the aggregates and so forth. And that's explained in the Samadhi Raja, or King of Meditative Concentration Sutra, where Lord Buddha has said that that all of the ideas of I or self, the idea of the self is the basic misconception of the self, and then from that all of the other kinds of ideas, erroneous ideas, arise out of that.
Oh yeah, 이 분배진도 가사대로 내려다 동반이 댄송나 댄라 팝소나 아니 현지딩도 댄라 팝아 아니 알지 리바테리 바삼바잠지 아니 최신의 로가 차와잠지 돈이 또 투바데 这个讲的탐测些这个讲的탐测通现在中国这看给我去提醒你懂吗听我跟提醒你的通这个去这个地方内陆东半你看啥个地方内陆东半你带了爸爸呢俺那嘛给日把给追几个贴给让给俺那碰线了说话给东半你日把结果搞了没得吧俺那通土吧一张写土吧一张哦对对这个今年探险些，这个今年探险通，是吧？当看个我去提醒你懂吗？听我给提醒你的通，是对吗的。
So thus, once one determines properly and understands the selflessness of the person, that understanding, you use reasoning and establish the selflessness of the person through investigation and reasoning. Once one has done that, then one can shift that understanding to direct it towards other objects, other things, phenomena other than the person or self. And then when one does that, one can easily understand how these other phenomena are also devoid of that intrinsic existence that ignorance wrongly projects onto them. And in that case, you don't need to employ a lot of elaborate reasoning because you've already gained an understanding of selflessness itself with respect to the person initially, then applying it to other phenomena. So this is expressed in multiple sources where it says that if you understand the reality of one thing, you can understand the reality of everything. If you understand literally one phenomenon correctly, that is, if you understand the emptiness, absence of a real self of one thing, then you can understand the reality of all of the other things without having to employ all of the extensive reasoning that you underwent in order to gain your initial understanding of emptiness.
Oh yeah, that didn't. Then I don't want you down a pumney. I don't need maybe Handong. Java Chevala, Tate, Yamsul in Zula, Handong could sort them by Handong could be true. Oh, Handong could be true. Oh, yes, one. You just
2 or 3.
You just there too. Oh, you just
2 or 3.
Oh, yeah. The Yamsul in Zula, Handong could sort them by Handong could be true. 다 상동고 초스나 가르스고로서나 상동고 규조 상동 줄레지에 그 상동고 규조 되라 상동고 초대 봐스고 다 상동 규조 간저 고고아래서나 조디 아니 다음에 베트엔 때라 배워 쳐봐라 아니 다음에 베트엔 덤바기 아니 규 탐바라 덤바 대라 규 탐바 대라 아니 다음에 베트엔 랑그 최퇴와 싸와 탐부 최퇴와 싸와다 아니 강한 퇴위 퇴인데 아니 수신도 일에 선바 세가라 퇴산요 저소인 바래 선비 퇴인배 수신도 선바나 임배 대가르서 라말라 최퇴네 다음배 퇴인데 라말라 최퇴나 대가 수신도 선비 퇴인배 디숨라 아니 저와제지 소숨 스그레
So this is having laid out the basic process in that way. Then this leads into the manner in which one actually accomplishes, when it takes up in practice, the practice of insight. This is on page 203 of the Tibetan of the sub-commentary. And so this has 2 parts, the way in which one relies upon the prerequisites for insight, and the way in which one meditates, develops through meditative cultivation insight. So the first subject, the way in which one relies upon the prerequisites for insight, there's several things listed where it says 3 things. First, one needs to depend upon a noble being, a noble person, someone who teaches it, and then one needs to apply oneself to hearing, to listening, and hearing about this Dharma, the Dharma in general, and this Dharma in particular. And then one needs also to properly think about this subject. And then, so with respect to the first of these, having heard this Dharma from a guru, someone who is qualified to teach it, that means, then one, that listening to the Dharma from such a guru is the meaning of the way, and then one has to properly, carefully think about exactly what you've heard. And those 3 things put together are called the 3 connected prerequisites.
Oh yeah, that's any. Tony Dobil Handong, you miru meri carrier, that Tony Dobil Handong, and he gave a chevala, Nela, Handong gave a chevala, and he Tony may be seen to talk about it. Tony may seen to Jebala, you don't buy it, and a ten about the mato. Don't buy me, you don't buy it, ten Mabawa, Tony let me be seen, maybe Yizang. 다 상동 논이 되게 상동 규소 매도 매로와데 어디지 따와난다 돈이 따와난다 예바체 얘네 아니 요동 바텔 얘네 미네 아니 가상 공도 셔바 나신 전에 셈내 구유권에 아니 신의 두대 아니 요동반이라 치다 된데도 냠바줘비 아니 신장의 세비 띵의지 아니 신의 톱네 아니 신의 팅 안에 아니 제도 고저 상동 주고 인장 신의 톱반이 임발래 신의 토차요 왕도 전에 상동 초와 임배 뭐야
So here then, the indispensable prerequisite for developing insight is an understanding of emptiness. Now, here we've actually, we're talking about the development of insight in which this insight is founded or based upon shamatha. So even before one developed, and the kind of shamatha that has been presented is shamatha, or which is referenced to, is the shamatha which takes emptiness as its object in the course of developing shamatha. And so therefore, of course, in order to develop that shamatha, that kind of shamatha, then one has to go through the 9 stages of development as mentioned, with emptiness as the object of that shamatha practice. Now, as a prerequisite for developing that shamatha itself, then of course one has to have achieved a proper view of emptiness in order to use that as an object. So here then in the text it says that the indispensable prerequisite for developing shamatha, and has to apply that to the the indispensable prerequisite for developing insight is understanding emptiness, but that applies to the development of shamatha as prior to even the development of insight as well. So one necessarily has to have obtained a pure view of the definitive meaning, and also have developed shamatha, and then 신의 톱차의 왕도 전에 다워 초임배.
신의 톱이 임발에 신의 톱차의 왕도 전에 다워 초와 임배.
So here then, in the sub-commentary here, there are 2 ways to do this. One could first develop shamatha without, use some other object other than emptiness. And then once one develops shamatha, and here then this is referring particularly to the achievement of shamatha, which is embraced by the 2 forms of mental and physical flexibility or workability. And you could develop that shamatha in that way, and then after that, develop the view and then use emptiness as your object. Or before you even begin to develop shamatha, you could gain an understanding of the definitive meaning of emptiness, and then use that as your object for developing shamatha. The way it's presented in this particular context is as if one had first developed shamatha and then is getting the view and then developing insight based on that.
동반이 때라 팜니 다 데라세나 공원 조금 말아와 아니 신의 톱찬이 아니 고난 동반이라면 비신의 태경 안에 드네 상도 두고 이제 뒤송고 아래다 이제 초와 임베스 아니 다 지진전배야 그 장군은 동가와 쳐볼라 아니 까나와 나시 전에 따와 도백가나 내가 평안미 따와 총이 띵이지라 아니 귀 준비 포도 잡아들이 중화르디 따와 남다 인다 마이스 장 지지제배야라 아니 근데 시위가나 따와 남다 마레스 다 따와 도발라 가려 고구레서나 사달래면 임미도 전에 소아쪽 샬라 초사 드바장 소아나시 전에 디라야 라마단 제배야 임미도 전에 땡 되네 确讲我的熊切莫那男性是，我的熊切莫是那当年点把给，安尼他露出也是个熊切莫在那男性。提团阳南都三把七八的，俺提点了推大都，安尼他上了多马堂， 아니 따와또비 치도 아니 초사바당 조데 아니 캐라람베 담바남 아니 추신도 송화데 어데가라 라바디 군도 쳐고 그래.
So here then, again, there are two ways of doing this. One can develop shamatha before one gains the view, and then gain the view, and then develop insight with the correct view as the object, or the object of the correct view as the object of your insight, and do it that way. Or from the very beginning, one can first get the correct view, and then develop shamatha, and then you can develop shamatha using the correct view of emptiness as the object, and then develop insight after that. So two ways of doing that. Here it says in this presentation, in this particular context, saying after one has obtained shamatha, then one seeks the view. And so in that way, if one does it that way, then actually in either case, one would first have to rely upon a guru who is inseparable from Lord Manjughosha. And so this is reference to Je Rinpoche, Je Tsongkhapa's view, his ascertainment of the view. He examined all of the views that were prevalent in Tibet prior to his time, and he found that some of them were simply wrong. Some of them were had some positive features, and were but were not precise and exactly the right view. And then so he, through his own effort, was able to ascertain exactly the correct view. And so we thus, if we want to practice in this way, need to depend upon a guru such as who is like that, who is inseparable from Lord Manjughosha. And then we need to listen very carefully to the Dharma from such a person who is, and the Dharma here is the great treatises which present the definitive meaning, such as the works of Nagarjuna and his tradition. We have to study those carefully and determine what the definitive meaning is. And then we also need to, over and over again, carefully think about the meaning of those great treatises. And then as a means to achieve this, we need to accumulate a great mass of merit. And we need to also very carefully guard the precepts and vows that we've taken, and even more than we had previously before seeking the view. When one is seeking the view, one needs to generate merit and guard one's precepts, even to a greater extent than one did prior to doing that.
Oh yeah, that day the song. Oh, Domju song ngala laba jundu chokode. Mojomana mame rimi mame tas rimi mamo rimi mame rimo tiwa degi ani membasa wada nama ke chawa chemme sumana sin lojomana ani phemme to ba yamsunyana chosa mena ani leme bi sabe na shi jeni ani do mi je ba domri mena rang khala be to ba chutin sun ma sana ani dam dabo me ba ke tedan de ba peje mi je ba ti thwe mi je ba.
So there's a verse here that illustrates the meaning of this. It says, just as it says, that if one hasn't trained one's mind, then it's like a picture of a lamp. Here, if one hasn't developed one's mind, then the view is like a picture of a lamp, in that a picture of a lamp doesn't provide any light, it doesn't provide any warmth. So the view is like that for such a person. And if one has not accumulated a mass of merit, then it's like a seed which is dry. a seed without moisture. A seed that has no moisture will not produce sprouts or crops or anything. And if one doesn't have one's vows and ethical discipline in place, then it's like a treasure which you don't own.
Oh, yeah. That didn't 가서를 사바 안에 뒤님이 뒤수 중앙인장 안에 사무 동반이 고문체 난주 된데라 최념소련 발라 발제 아니 발제지 참아 연구와 인장 아니 라마라이 송고도 추바 같이 오서
바칠.
발제지 무슨 비치도 라마다 합이 송고 나도 추바데 아니 개쳐버려서.
So then likewise, now at this time of degeneration, it's also extremely important to be included within the protection circle of a guru deity.
Oh yeah. 다 드니니와 상동 검수라 다 가차 참몽을 제 사무 동반이 된了包括一张 안에 사무 동반이가 가차 참몽을 좀 받아 안에 다음에 권배 안에 신나다요 오 명장다에 좀도出주 이 예배나네 다 담보들라 가자 참몽을 좀 받대라 나 진양상 나대라 마에 담이 추나도 냠샤게 나래 안에 마에 봐 안에 담이 추나도 기타 예중 출版나신 안에 셈 참모 시와 참모기 관 안에 가서래 그 요라마 안에 지자바천에 다고래 송아들 참미시가 관바피 교회라신 관바피 교회라신이스나 안에 암 가사 교태게 안에 라신데 안에 바 다고래 스케보천에 다고요한테 장바다 대인바사.
So that's in order to, the way in which one actually meditates, develops through meditative cultivation, insight, has two subdivisions: the identification of the subtle form of the object to be negated, and then the way in which one establishes selflessness, establishes that everything is only designatedly existent, that is, internal and external phenomena are mere names. We do this by means of meditating and developing the understanding of selflessness. The first of these is referenced in the verse 29 of the root text, where it says that without wavering from from the state of that previous meditative equipoise, like a tiny minnow darting about in a clear pool, within a clear pool, then with a subtle form of awareness, one examines with discernment the character of the meditating person. Here, the meditating person, or person means the I or the self of the meditator.
Oh yeah, that did what this do. I did Yamshati in a ane mayo Yamshala Mayoba. Ane da she with Tuni, Bena Tora, Somigo and Yachu Batar. Ane Chami Sheriff G is that only to be Rangi or Castle Lo Chamotiki, Tony Zang Jabachin, Chami Sheriff G, Gwambabi, that the Tawa Della Bebabi, Giwu de Mayerangati, that Rashi did, that to Charavate, that to Chavate, Shenda Manova, Musumi Terre.
So the commentary on this explains that the sub-commentary says that without the way in which one engages in this investigation, without wavering from the state of that previously developed meditative equipoise, is, for example, if you have a pool or a lake which is unwavering, and similar to the way a tiny fish darts about within it, then through a very subtle form of wisdom, here this is referring to the awareness which is investigating the character of the person here, then that very subtle form of awareness a very subtle form of wisdom, it begins to investigate the character of the person who is meditating, that is the nature of the I. And then when investigates it such that one doesn't mistake it for something else, then that is what is meant by identifying here, identifying.
Oh yeah, the bela nyachung said the ane chami shewaki, chami shewe, ane chamu shewachiki, ane or Luisune, ane casa dabi, Luisu chami dabi ten yin ten race. That's all the careers and Jangulama Tonga chibi. The Milgana to Suana Shin Chani. Gune Numo Bata, number chami, Gune Numo to Denji to be che. Number chama, Anita Namjang to be che, column la sowa. Any Chacha Chachin Chawanam, Chitawa Shindu, Ane Rangi, Wotang, Chacha Mandreva. Oh, Sunkijera. Chacha Chachin Chawana, Chitawa Shindu, Mandreva, Jenibi, Sheriff Sawa Toba, Segana, Sheriff Chewa, Sheriff Sawa, Sheriff Nua, Sheriff Sawa, Siora, Tinaki, Sheriff Sawa, and Toba Chuchi, Chewa Sunji, Sheriff Chawatilla Chase.
So thus, the meaning of this identification here is similar to the example of the small fish, just as that was said. Here then the text says with a subtle form of awareness. Here this is like a subtle sort of part of the mind, of the mind. That's what's doing the investigation here. That's the meaning of what the root text says is the process of investigation. So, although that's the case, here chiefly, and then the author cites a passage from one of J. Rinpoche's works, the prayer Daemon, and it says that this is referring, or the prayer here is saying, please bless me to be able to obtain clear wisdom. The wisdom has different facets of it. It can be profound, it can be quick, and it can be clear. So here he's praying for the clear form of wisdom, which is able to investigate and analyze, distinguish without mixing them up, exactly as they are in all of their fine points, both the side of mental affliction as well as the side of purification. So the side of mental affliction refers to all of the phenomena that are included within the first two of the Four Noble Truths, the suffering and the origin of suffering, and then the side of purification refers to the aspects of the two latter Four Noble Truths.
Oh yeah, Tata Chitawa Shindu yu mandrewa tini, yu mandrewa jebe, zangbam kewe tatsu te yin che. Ta tini rangshin se de mingi namzan la, ta rangshin se la rangshin tenpa ta mi tenpa. Rangshin shebi mingi namzan la, soje la tatu chewe rangshin mi tenpa ta. Taba la tatu chewe rangshin tenpa nyi che yu ka na. Tenpa nyi che yu. Gacha tendu la chigire, soje la, sosu kiwo na la, ane chitang wo karaji chana yang, tendu ku nawa mewa zani mewa inzang. Ane kasore, soje la tatu chewe, rangshin mitenpa.
So then where the root text says, one does this with discernment, one examines the mind here with discernment. It's doing so such that it doesn't mix up the object. That wisdom is not mixing together different objects. It's doing so discerning the specific object that it's investigating. So then here the word nature in the root text, there are multiple synonyms for nature. And here there's or different connotations of the word nature. Here, with respect to the cognitions of ordinary beings, there's the nature which constantly appears to them, which is unreal. And then there's the nature which always appears for the Aryas, and that is real, a real nature. So among those two, the first of these is the thing which is to be negated, which is something being established as real in the way that it appears to ordinary persons. And 랑신
다 파발라 따도 소제라 따도 제베란시 담보데 가자 된줄라치 소제라 가난 탐제 된줄면도 매와 인상 가자 된줄라치.
So the first of these, the nature which constantly appears to the cognitions of ordinary persons is, for ordinary persons, nothing appears as it actually is. So it appears to them in a way in which it doesn't actually exist. Therefore, there's a disparity between the way it appears and the way it exists, and that means that those appearances are unreal. They don't, the objects don't exist in the way they appear. And then for the Aryas, there's the real nature which appears for them.
리갑지 뭐 순지 지위랑신 세대 아니 다 가서래 지당 지위랑신 세대라 고좀 안 보여. 코랑 그 라신 타도 아니 안 보러 거야 여와 인장 난데 지용의 수미 언제 세가나 소지응라 다주 체외 라신데 미디엄 된주체 아니 파발라 다주 체외 라신데 아니 덴바 메바
So then with here then so that with respect to the first of these I'm sorry, I got messed up. 각자 된주블체
가자 된주라체 라신 세데 소제라 다주 체외 라신데 가자 된주라체 봐.
So the nature which appears to ordinary persons is the thing which is actually to be negated. That is, things existing as, or they appear as if they were real, established as being real, and that is actually the object of negation. Because for ordinary persons, everything appears as if it existed intrinsically, having its own intrinsic nature. And that appearance of things being intrinsically existent is that appearance of them as real or existing as they appear in that way is the thing which is to be negated.
그래서 이와데 파발라 따도나 외라신세 차유라신세 이와니 같이 라신데스 같이 라신지 소제라 따도 차유 같이 라신데 때는 maybe 다음에는 초거외 파발라 따도 제외 라신데 미담바데 초거외 라신세 자간가 돈이라 거예요 말에 다지시원하시.
So here then, within this context, we can take that the nature of the person, which is to be identified here within this particular context, where one is attempting to ascertain the object of negation, the form of nature, which, or the connotation of the word nature, which is what one is attempting to ascertain, is that appearance of things as being real, that is actually to be negated, the object of negation. And then with respect to the second connotation of nature here, the way in which things appear to the Aryas, and that nature is real because it exists in the way that it appears. Here that is, we have to take that in the sense of the selflessness, which is the total non-existence of that nature which is to be negated, the object of negation there. So that being the case, one can't take the term nature, when we see the word nature, we cannot understand that in the sense of being emptiness.
Oh yeah, that 같이 라신 담바 추바데 가차 디니 사데 가치 랑신 담바 추바데 춤나 딘지 지주 추구레 냠바기 아니 가치 찌데 마노와 아니 미기 통 아니 라바 수유 쳇파죠 아니 가치데 정말 마숨 봐도 아니 로직도 지네 안 따고 그래.
So then as far as this object of negation here, this is again referring to the things appearing as if they were real, as if they existed the way they appear to us as being intrinsically existent. One has to seek that object of negation. One has to search for that, find that appearance of things as being real. Until one develops a extremely clear concept of this, one has to gain a very, very clear, precise concept of this this nature which we falsely ascribe to things until it's such that we can like see it with our eyes or hold it in our hands.
Oh yeah, 아니 노마노 때 간에서래서나 아니 노마노야 아니 루루야 사기 아니 따와때라 바비 내가지 아니 가장을 소만나신 챤니 아니 장고라마 종가와 침비 아니 중침보나라 아니 숨바 대다다 빈비 아니 냠용 젠지 라면명아 코나를 쇼거와인.
So as far as being able to do this, so it says until you can, up until the point you can hold this in you can see it with your eyes or you can grasp it with your hands. You need to look for it by focusing your mind single-pointedly. And then as far as whether one is doing this in a correct or erroneous fashion, it's the only way we can accomplish that is through doing this kind of analysis, investigation based upon the instructions of a guru who has experience of this, and that experience has to accord with the great treatises. So here, the guru has to explain it in a way that conforms and guide us in a way that conforms with the great treatises of the Indian masters, as well as the works of Je Tsongkhapa.
Oh yeah, tenje inza, ane takte kasore, no chikoyarese. Inza kondo ane langdong ko gizo tembe kaso, ane kasore, maboji koyasongwa yege, rwa. 향동 주주점에 가서 아니 주소 가래 그 송아 대다당 아니 된다 니 내가 수가 따와 때니까 만노 그남 라라 뉴도 개와시 임바 라라 그와 내가 개와시 임바 나네 타 마셔나 라라 그와 임바 타 나네 타 마셔나 지점 시에봐야 동아지 주추나 아니 미셔봐나 따치메스 야
미셔봐나 따치
하고 소 quando se tu gangara la chama ji gogo res ran la chama de ma ko che ro go wa shi yin ba de ta chen ni ta ma chen na te cho go res ta ma chen na chi zam xie wa de ane rang pen to go ma se dong a ji ju chu na ane ma xie ma na ta chi me ya quando go so so 한국의 주주다위 가라 고에송아당 단단히 가서 가자 만어와 고에송아지 소야 고거래서나 라니라 고바다 하고 그래서 라니라 고고도 요와도 마시나 아니 팬토고 말해서 그래.
So then with respect to all of these things that are these necessities that have been mentioned above, as far as all of the prerequisites for the developing of insight, here then all of the necessities that were enumerated above, and particularly this ascertainment of the view that one needs to gain it, it has to be such that from inside oneself, one has this precise and firm determination that I myself have to get this immediately. I need this right now. And if one doesn't have that, then it's the case that no matter how much one understands about this, it will simply be a source of suffering for oneself. And then what needs to be said if one doesn't understand it?
Oh, yeah. And tena gacha rande na ngwe jingo wa sa de ta junju ga la so wa na xin xin de da yong ngwe la ma ri ba te yong ngwe me zhen ba yin se ga ji ji de rang xin ji chu ba mu ra wang du chu ba mu den ba chu xie ge chu zu de lo la chu ma xian na ani gacha ani ti dong ba ge dong ba de lo la cha chu gu ma re se so wa na xin xin de是吧因这样家长我最嘛是我嘛现在呢，提东把的带了拍没多把的，你大部分我啦嘛是把提人我们怎么一数嘛那些钱的对了样，多对那多你多个话了图啊嘞，家长我嘛现呢，你多你多图个嘛一张，多对那多你我多个话了图，多你多个在看着话是呢，天天考话了多个话了图，多你嘛多呢，你。가서래 당생기 그날란데 당생기 녀mon제 두수 그날란데 레사데 아니 사제 일레지 풍보들 안에 아니 동아 바통에 바지 온거 와라 다 돈이 돈은 인다 돈이 뭐또봐 컴바 콘도 페바체네 아니 당생 말이 바사베다 방와지 밤데 주당진 양무 방와 용바 저우 코와도 그와 인장 대녀 코와라 줘와라 투 좋아 그래서 코알라 좋아래 또 대내 동아랑시 동아제랑시래 마대발라 투배 코와 분조진 자자 일레지 분보들래 진짜라 동아제랑시제 마도 발라 투배
So here then it says that the reason, therefore, the reason why it's necessary that one ascertains this, identifies this exact object of negation within oneself. That's the basic setup here for this statement. Here then, one has to determine exactly what that object of negation is, this misapprehension of the self, the way in which we falsely perceive things as if they possessed intrinsic existence, and particularly that is relevant or pertains to the way our self or our I, we appear to ourselves as if we possess this kind of autonomous mode of existence, that we existed by means of our own intrinsic nature, that we existed some way that didn't depend upon things outside of ourselves. If we don't, we absolutely have to identify that the way that appears to us, that false motive of our self's existence, if we don't do that, then in brief, here it says that the reason it's necessary to identify this object of negation within ourselves, this specific object of negation, is in brief, this comes down to the necessity of understanding emptiness. If we don't understand emptiness, if we don't understand this object of negation, there's no way to understand emptiness, because emptiness is the absence of this falsely superimposed object of negation upon things. So it comes down to that. And the understanding of emptiness, I'm sorry, I have to start that over. In brief, that the need to identify the object of negation within ourselves comes down to the necessity of understanding emptiness. That in turn comes down to the necessity of achieving liberation from samsara. If we don't understand the object of negation, there's no way to understand emptiness, because emptiness is a specific elimination of the false intrinsic existence that we superimpose upon things. And without understanding emptiness, then there's no way that we can achieve liberation. The misapprehension, the not understanding emptiness is equivalent to misapprehending the self, And that misapprehension of the self is, as we've said, what gives rise to all of the other mental afflictions, which gives rise to karma, which gives rise to all of the different forms of suffering. And if we don't achieve liberation, then there's no way that we will achieve transcendence from the basic suffering character that we are experiencing at present.